cloud is the fabric that holds our modern society together. Even Bitcoin at the beginning was centralized. It was Satoshi's node everybody sync from. How do you find the right node to sync from is a challenge, but you rely on these services. You have no idea what's happening on the back end. You have no idea how reliable they are. And we saw what happened recently with CrowdStrike. All of us use cloud without realizing. So we all rely on this cloud service called CrowdStrike that went down, and it literally got the planet to a standstill. And cloud is ultimately a public utility that should not be closed off, and that should not be this opaque. And that's the reason why you want to decentralize the cloud.
Greg, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. It's a podcast we've been wanting to record for a number of weeks, if not like a number of months now. So it's finally such a pleasure to have you on and to talk everything Akash on Are DePIN. And I really wanted to jump straight in because there's so much to cover. So I guess starting with you, even before Akash Network, what is you personally, where do you come from in terms of industry experience?
Industry experience. Before Akash, I founded a company called Angel Hack. So Angel Hack happens to be the largest hackathon that's accelerated in the world. It's known for igniting Web 2, right? So at peak, we had 200,000 developers across 50 different cities. So when we did a hackathon each time, TechCrunch used to write about it. It was very, very popular. Facebook blogs, people used to be super excited. So we kind of created the hackathon, the modern day hackathon as you see it. There were several companies that launched at Angel Hack. A popular one would be Firebase that launched at Angel Hack. There's even rumors that Lambda Labs was incubated or ideated at Angel Hack. There are a lot of companies that launched there. So that's where I think my passion towards solving the deployment problem really began, because one common pattern I've noticed working with thousands of developers was, you would build something in a hackathon and you will quickly deploy on a tool like Heroku or now Verceli call it, right? Something that lets you get off the ground very quickly. The moment you wanted to go and scale, the moment you get some users, and now you need to add servers and you need to add compute, it becomes extremely challenging because the next step was Amazon. And Amazon is very, very convoluted, right? 500 different services and infrastructure code and all that stuff. So we wanted to build something.
And by Amazon, you mean specifically AWS?
AWS, yes.
Yeah.
AWS. And we wanted to build something, and a lot of challenges with immutable infrastructure, not to get into too much of the weeds, but every time you deploy a workload, you have to mutate the server. You got to change the packages in the server. You get into all this dependency mismatch, and you get into all kinds of problems. So deployments were hard to scale, right? So on one hand, you had to move fast. On another hand, you have to make sure things are stable. So we wanted to solve the problem. How can we deploy at scale and iterate with speed? Is there a middle ground? And that's when we fell into containers, Linux containers, right? So it's a company called Docker. This is way before Docker came around, containers could solve a very interesting challenge where you could package the workload, in your workstation, deploy that package in a container to your remote servers, and the workload would work exactly the way you intend it to do so, right? So that's really where we started working on compute, and this is in 2011 time frame. So I made some contributions to this ecosystem called Kubernetes. In fact, wrote some software there that's used today by NVIDIA. Kubernetes Core, Docker, HashiCorp, which is another company that does Terraform. So Terraform is this tool that is used to orchestrate the cloud, used by 90% of the cloud workloads today. So I was an early contributor to this whole open source revolution, right? So that's when there was rumblings about hey, people being dissatisfied with this few options that you have in the market, which is Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And that's when we saw an opportunity that, look, there is this centralized behemoth, this oligopoly of companies control the cloud, right? That leads to misaligned incentives for developers, experience just drifting away from what developers, deem a cloud should look like. And just too much power leads to inefficient pricing, right? So things getting expensive over time, and heavily limited, heavily gated. We saw that with the GPUs. So that's when the foundation for Akash really began.
That's a really good story. So I guess like just to summarize, what are the sort of downfalls that these cloud providers have right now? Because cloud really changed the game from the what it was beforehand. So what are the sort of, I guess, problems that exist now specifically with cloud that Akash can solve?
So big challenge today is just access to resources, right? So I'll give you an example. If you're a machine learning company trying to get GPUs to do any model training or inference, it's nearly impossible to get from the cloud providers like at Amazon, Google, Microsoft, right? We're talking high density GPUs, with H100s, H100s. It was impossible like 6 months ago. Now it's getting a little easier, but still it's very, very hard to get. Number one. Number two, even if you get them, in order to get them, you need to get into a seven-figure enterprise contract and wait months on out to get the resources allocated to you. And if you're lucky, if you're not outbidded by an OpenAI or Elon Musk's of the world, you may get lucky, right? So it's very, very challenging to get high density GPUs as a small size company or a mid size company, right? The costs are enormous, the lock-ins are enormous, and that's what you get. You have no visibility into how a company like Amazon is going to prioritize your customers, right? And second, they nickel and dime you on every little thing, right? So you get compute, but then you got to pay extra for bandwidth. Then you get bandwidth, but then you got to pay extra for outbounds or egress or ingress. Then the little story. So these costs end up adding up to an enormous budget. You have no idea what's happening at the end, and that's the business model. They obfuscate the real cost, and you get a bill by end of the month, right? And third is it's fully opaque, right? So we saw what happened with when you rely on these services. You have no idea what's happening on the background. I mean, we have no idea who has access to your workloads. You have no idea how reliable they are. And from the onset, we saw what happened recently with CrowdStrike. So we all rely on this cloud service called CrowdStrike that went down, and it literally got the planet to a standstill. Like you couldn't fly, you couldn't eat, you couldn't, you know, go anywhere. Right? Transportation was locked up. So that's just an example, and that was not a nation state attack. It was a bad code being pushed by a developer, which it shouldn't be there. But it just tells you how lethargic some of these people are. Like if you're running the world's infrastructure and you are so disconnected from the security aspects or the reliability aspect, like what are we doing? So it's not about centralized companies bad. It's just that over time they get corrupted, they get polluted, right? Even though they start immediate as a with good intentions in the beginning, eventually they just get ruined. And that's why you want um, people owning, right, instead of a corporation that owning a public utility, because people have a lot more, I would say, like a better incentive to keep things running, especially as public utility. So the opaqueness leads to a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of reliability, right? So, and for context, Akash has been around for 4 years and has never gone down, not a single time. I can say that with pride because every piece of Akash goes through this rigorous like review. And I'm not saying we're not going to have faults. I mean, we do have faults as well. I mean, there was a incident recently where somehow a piece of it's a very complicated piece of security in the authentication layer got shipped without proper reviews, right? But the moment it got shipped, because it's open source, and because people use Akash, somebody using Akash, a security company, immediately flagged it and sent the community a report saying that, look, there is an incident we noticed, you shipped. Then send a report basically, right? So an incident report, And there was a patch that was released immediately and patched up before anyone could get impacted. Yeah, faults do happen, but the question is, how do you react to those faults? If you have the more number of people watching your source code, the better. So that's why open source systems tend to be a lot more reliable. That's why when you don't see Linux going down. Windows went down because of CrowdStrike. Right? Linux doesn't go down because there's nothing. I mean, there are security vulnerabilities, but the moment there's a vulnerability, the patch is issued immediately and patched up, right? Well, so that's one of the third reasons, right? So, and fourth, in oligopoly, right? So oligopolies tend to stifle the competition because they build moats that are impossible for new entrants to come in. Like imagine starting a cloud company to compete with Amazon in 2024, right? So why? Not because people don't have ideas. It's just that even if you have ideas, it's very hard to break the moat. And I think we need to change that, considering cloud is the fabric that holds our modern society together. All of us, you and me, all of us use the cloud without realizing we're using the cloud. Right here, we're using the cloud right now to record this podcast. I mean, it's going on an Amazon server somewhere, right? We all use a cloud, and we all pay a cloud tax without realizing. Somewhere north of 50% of every penny we pay to an online service goes to a cloud provider. So we all pay this tax without realizing us paying the tax. And cloud is ultimately a public utility that should not be closed off, and that should not be this opaque. And that's the reason why you want to decentralize the cloud, and that's the reason why Akash exists.
Mm. Yeah, this is the reason why I like what you guys are doing. In addition to DePIN as a whole concept, because it allows business models that can compete with businesses that traditionally you wouldn't have been able to compete with in other realms, right? And with you guys, you would be able to compete with the likes of AWS and all the sort of big boys that, as you said, if you were to start a company like AWS now that's not decentralized, it's like you get shot out of the water. It's like impossible. You need billions worth of capital to even get your first customers. It's impossible. So that's why I really like what you guys are doing. And yeah, you talk about how the decentralization leads to all those benefits. I think what people miss is that tax element. Is that given that most of the internet runs on services like AWS, if we do move to something like yourselves, a decentralized solution, things like SaaS products, things like what we're doing right now on this podcast, there's potential for it to go down in price because their cost basis for running these services goes down.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what people miss that. So that's why I think, I guess, like my question to you before we go on to how people can get involved with Akash and sort of Akash as a company, it's currently what is the reason why, what's the sort of bottleneck in transitioning from centralized into decentralized solutions? Like what's stopping it? Because the cost basis is, and the environmental as well, it's far lower than the existing solutions.
Yeah. So the two main aspects of Akash, and I think it's generally true for most deeper networks, right? The main challenge is friction in using the product, or to say it better, the behavioral change required from a user to use decentralized systems. Because decentralized systems, truly decentralized systems, are permissionless and open source, and there's no single source of failure, right? That also means it's hard to discover how to connect to what node to connect, right? Because the service that advertises the discovery itself is susceptible to attack, right? So service discovery becomes very challenging. Now we all rely on websites, but okay, websites are another centralized, um, choke points, right? So anyway, so we got to have some trade off. Like even Bitcoin at some point in the beginning was centralized. It was Satoshi's node. Everybody kind of like sync from, right? How do you find the right node to sync from? Is a challenge. And okay, we take some shortcuts. We'd be like, okay, we're going to use a website and going to recommend a few RPC servers that you can connect to, all the good stuff. And now we get into like, okay, we have permissionless systems, right? So you can use Akash by having a key in your browser. Well, you need to install a browser wallet, and you need to go get AKT. Where do you get that from? You go to Coinbase. Well, you go through this whole like KYC process to complete from Coinbase, right? And that's challenging. And second, you have to go and install the wallet, the Keplr wallet, right? So if you go to a dev and be like, hey, you got to install the browser wallet, which by the way has access to all the websites you're browsing. Good luck convincing, right? And the worst part is like when you buy AKT, you can't even use your business credit card. You can't use your business Amex. You got to use your personal bank account. You can't use a business bank account as well, or you need to open a business account and try doing that on Coinbase, right? So there's just getting the user to cross the threshold from like non-crypto to crypto is impossible. We see a 99% drop-off rate in that aspect. Now, is there a way to probably higher, like, is there a way to offset that by taking shortcuts of having a centralized system at the front end, and a decentralized system on the back end? Yes, but it can be one company. It has to be multiple companies. And that's another challenge. How do you go convince a company to offer your services as a DePIN network that doesn't come from the token issuer, token creator, right? Because there's all kinds of legal challenges when the issuer itself is the primary consumer of the service, and um, it's a gray area. Nothing has been defined from it from a legal standpoint, um, and so and you have to comply to the law of the land, wherever you're offering the services. And a lot of them now, I mean, it's getting very interesting. Cloud is a lot more relaxed than other services, but I would imagine if you're Helium, you have some compliance requirements. You have to censor, and you have to do all this like crazy things that I don't know, talking NSA, I suppose, right? I have no idea how this telecom companies work, but there are a lot of legal requirements. Like we get approached by law enforcement, and right now our answer is like we don't control the system, so there's no way for us to even help you, right? Because there's no way for us to know what's going on to the system. But the systems that we have control over, we by law we have to comply, right? So that breaks decentralization, and it breaks privacy guarantees. And then the moment you say, okay, you're going to censor some of those application because we have to comply with the FBI, the community doesn't see the difference between the centralized entity having to comply and the decentralized entity not having to comply, right? So, or not having, no, can't comply, not having to comply. You have to comply, right? So a lot of these like unknown legal gray areas. That's why you don't want the company that created the blockchain to be the company that's offering the services in a centralized manner. It has to be someone else. And or the other shortcut, like a lot of them are taking right now, under heavy risk from a legal standpoint, is to like just put a login password, put a Google login in front of the DePIN, and that seemed to be working. I mean, it definitely works, right? I mean, then you have full customization experience. You don't have
Yeah.
to do,
That's what I was going to
all the
say
like
actually. With it's like account abstraction elements, right?
the account abstraction is. I mean, I hate these definitions in crypto, right? Like, so one thing we're doing right now is we're keeping the interface extremely non-custodial, in the sense like your wallet stays in the browser and no one has access to the wallet, but decoupling um, payments, in the sense like there could be a different wallet that can pay for your deployment running on your wallet, your browser. So when you decouple these, the payments from the operational side of things, payments from ownership, I call it, you have permissionlessness, and you can solve the payments problem. But then again, second challenge is like another challenge we see a lot in decentralized systems that are really decentralized systems is notifications. Like, how do you know when something goes wrong? How does the user get to know? Well, if you're a centralized system, you have an email, right? Well, I don't want, as a company, your email address. I don't want the liability of protecting your email addresses. That's why we have decentralized systems. Like, okay, how do we solve true decentralized messaging, notifications? There's a lot of these challenges we take for granted in centralized systems that are not available to you as a decentralized developer. So, well, the shortcut is like, oh, put a centralized system on top of a decentralized system, which is a trade-off, but is it worthy or is it not? It's a big question that you need to ask, I suppose. Like, and depending on what area you're serving, right? Like for AI, I think it's okay because people don't. It's a lot less risky. But if AI, someone is, I don't know, if you're doing AI now in Europe, and someone generates a politically incorrect message, someone calls a politician fat, um, can I, as a platform owner, go to jail? It seems to be a case now with Telegram, right?
Yeah,
So
they've
I
set a dangerous
don't,
precedent for sure.
I have no idea like how these things, how safe or unsafe. I mean, looks like it's unsafe or safe. I mean, that's why you want. So I'm here to build decentralized systems. I'm not here to build centralized systems. But you're asking me how to put a centralized, front end and break the decentralization in order for DePIN to win. That's the trade-off that we need to decide on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it gets to like philosophical questions as well. It's like because it was invented for anti-censorship, but then if governments will control sort of and hold you sort of personally responsible for what happens on your network, when it's like, well, we just created it, it's open source, it's decentralized, we can't control what actually happens. Um, I mean, the Telegram example is a good one, but yeah, it's a difficult question to ask. But if you just had sort of one reason as to what the key friction point is for mass adoption of something like Akash Network, like what would you say it is?
Just a lack of authentication infrastructure on device.
What do you mean by that?
So and lack of liquidity. So basically, if the device, Apple device, if Apple comes tomorrow and say like, oh, we're going to support private keys authentication, we got every phone becomes a wallet. They're kind of going in that direction, the passkeys and all that, right? So if my key is stored locally, and they have a secure enclave on the phones, every computer has secure enclave. Uh, if Apple comes up and says we can leverage the secure enclave to store your private keys, um, and you can transfer those keys to other devices in a encrypted manner, so you can have effectively anywhere you go in a peer-to-peer manner. Like I can transfer a key from my computer to my phone, you know in a peer-to-peer manner, and we let you use your credit card to onboard. Right? I think that's another big thing, to actually purchase AKD tokens or whatever ETH tokens or Sol
Hmm.
tokens, and then I think that'll change the game forever.
So it's very much to do with the ease of distribution.
Yeah, distribution.
Yeah.
Distribution is all you need. Because I hear like when people have AKT in their wallet, people are like, "This is the easiest thing to." I mean, way easier than the traditional cloud. This is the easiest thing I've ever used. There's clear evidence, right? I mean, we have incredible qualitative feedback from people that use Akash, that love Akash. But the challenge is how do you get them to use,
Mm.
how do you increase that activation rate from 0.5
Yeah.
percent?
But then my question to you then, Greg, is that seems like it's something that's out of your control to some degree. You're sort of relying on the industry and the market as a whole moving forward and supporting this. Whether they support it or not is still a question. Like, it might not happen. You guys can build the best service, but then it comes to, what are you guys doing in order to progress and to reduce those friction points and to maybe control the controllables? Um, I guess like from your side, what are you developing to move that needle?
Yeah, so we have this new feature called trial wallets that we're working on. So so we figured out a solution. It's sort of like a hack, but it works. Um, where and it's legal, right? So we can do this really well. Where if you are a user on Akash, you go to console.akash.network, there's a wallet that gets created for you automatically that stays in the browser. Uh, and then we have this feature called authorized payments where another wallet can authorize to pay for your deployment, like an overclock control wallet. I can authorize to pay for your deployment. So I pay for your deployment trial, first like $10, right? And you can deploy using the AKT that I gave you, but this AKT can only be used for deployment and not for transfer. You can't send it to an exchange itself. So I know for sure that you're going to use the AKT only for deployments. And then I can, when you need more money, you can, there's a Stripe checkout mechanism where you can purchase AKT, uh, and we'll keep that AKT and we'll authorize you as a user to use the AKT or USDC, whatever. So this way, I am not forcing you to keep the AKT in your wallet, in your browser, and you bypass the wallet install step, at least so you have an authenticated browser essentially. And uh, and and you're loaded up to get working on Akash. And we showed that feature to a few people, and they were like, they were blown away. So I think it's going to work out really well. I have a lot of confidence it's going to work out because at least, or at least we'll have the data. Now we know it's 0.5% conversion. If the conversion increases 10%, that we call that success, right? So we go through this iterative like mode. And then the next step is just top of the funnel at that point. So to increase the top of the funnel, when you have various mechanisms, we have your traditional organic mechanism. Akash gets a lot of organic traffic because of who we are, but also we can get into paid channels, right? Because now if we go paid, a conversion so poor that doesn't really matter unless you fix this leaky bucket. You know, so we can activate paid, right? So that way we have very clear CAC to LTV sort of like calculations. So we'll be able to be in a more, what do you call, more diligent mechanism on how we look at user acquisition, right? So we have a lot of these tools available to us, but unless we fix this like leaky bucket problem, we're not going to be able to use those tools. So I'm excited. I'm really excited for this account, quote unquote, account abstraction mechanism. And then we got to solve the notifications problem. We have a few ideas on how to solve the notifications problem. The challenge is
That's
like,
kind
how
of
does
the
a
industry as
provider?
a whole, though, isn't it? It's like the notification
Yeah,
thing is the industry as a whole. Like I've faced this
yeah,
problem multiple times
yeah, yeah.
from a
How do
marketing standpoint.
you? Right. This is one, marketing is one thing. I mean, user
Yeah,
activation, user like engagement, you know,
it's the
infrastructure,
same
but
channel. Like you can't. It's very difficult to find that user.
critical updates like a provider, for example, doing AI is a lot, right? So there's this massive bug on NVIDIA drivers. The provider wants to upgrade the drivers and they want to restart all the workloads, the server, right? And there's some machine learning job running on the server. Well, how does the provider communicate with the user, right? And there's no emails. So it becomes extremely challenging. So we have to build a notification mechanism in a post email world. Emails are also like terrible for notifications, right? So um, it's very challenging. So we're exploring that. That it's a big problem to solve. But one step at a time, right? Let's solve the activation problem, and then we will get into email or notifications.
Greg, taking a step back. So you mentioned in terms of user acquisition and lifetime value and those sort of data points. Taking a step back in terms of Akash Network, um, what is the benefit? Like what happens in terms of like practically when people sign up? Like what does Akash deliver you?
Well, you just get cheap H100s, right? So right out of the box, you get to use H100s, which are the most advanced chips for AI, for $149, which is the lowest in the industry. There's nothing cheaper than that. And that itself is incredible value for a lot of people, right? So you get amazing, but you just get on-demand access to all these incredible, GPUs. And CPUs are like 1/10 the cost of what you would otherwise pay on Amazon, right? So it's very low cost compute. A lot of people do amazing things I hear every day, like a lot of examples. I mean, the big ones. I mean, NVIDIA is a customer of Akash, right? So NVIDIA is a behemoth. It's interesting how we engage with NVIDIA. Yesterday, a senior executive from NVIDIA tweeted about Akash integration. They're completing again the new integration they're working on. Nvidia obviously is a big large company. They're not going to go to Coinbase and buy crypto, even though they did, the company that they acquired did before. But now they have a finance team. They have all kinds of like corporate processes to getting crypto. Um, so they invoice Overclock Labs company, and we sort of like settle in a monthly basis, right? So there's this like net post payment that we're prepaying kind of thing. So there are all kinds of like new mechanisms to work with large corporations that we're learning as a company, right? So there's that friction point. Like, how do big enterprises look? Well, big enterprises don't like to have crypto on the balance sheets. That's just the that's just a law. I mean, do you want to go fight with the finance teams of Nvidia, which is the most valuable company in the world? Good luck doing that. Right? Like, so they don't care about crypto, they're AI, right? But they like using Akash. How do you satisfy a customer like that? So you gotta, because a lot of times it's, you have no, in case like Nvidia is fine because it's a large corporation and you're just, there's the chances of censorship and all that is different, right? And the chances of them running some weird workload is like lower, so you can take the risk. So I think the solution, this whole like decentralization problem, is not like one solution fits all. I think it's case by case, right? So for Nvidia, I'm okay hosting their workloads, or at least like knowing about what they're hosting. I'm okay to take on the liability, right? Because just knowing what someone is doing makes you liable. The reason I don't want that is I don't want to know what people are doing, so I'm not liable. And not only I don't want to know, I don't. There's no way for me to know what people are using. But if I go and take money from Nvidia, I know what they're doing because I know their workloads. I know their signatures because they have to provide to me, right? So I'm okay on taking that risk from Nvidia. Yeah, that's really I think where the world is going in terms of decentralization. Mark.
Mm. Yeah. And in terms of, so Akash Network right now, so you said that you have access to H100s. Where does H100s live in terms of, I know it's a decentralized world, so where are they?
Different providers, right? So we have range of providers now. Foundry Digital is a big company. They're owned by DCG. They have a lot of machine learning boxes that they bought for, actually GPUs they bought for mining crypto, not being useful to mine crypto anymore. So they all converted to AI boxes now. We have a company called um, you know, I mean, there are companies called Cato. There's a company called Cato which buys unused boxes from OpenAI, puts them on Akash, and there's obvious cloud tier two cloud providers like Oblivious and whatnot, Exhibits. These are just, they bought a lot of H100s, because I don't know if you know how well you know about this whole like supply chain, because it's very hard to get H100s, right? So if you have a way to get H100s like in mass, you can get finance easily. You can get a loan for like 10 to 15% interest. There are people dying to give you money for the interest, especially when the Fed is going to change. Fed is going to lower the interest rate, right? Uh, so there's a lot of capital out there. It just needs, and they love the collateral. H100s being an incredible collateral because they're easy to sell. They're very liquid, right? And they hold value. They don't depreciate as much as other assets. It's a good collateral. There's a lot of debt financing available. So the companies like CoreWeaves of the world went and bought a ton of H100s, and a lot of them are not used now. And these are companies that they can't, have on-demand offering. They need to sell you en masse, or because they're just not set up for it operationally. So Akash gives you an on-demand capability for your H100s as a provider, right? So you can use Akash and be like, oh, on demand, I can sell this compute for you, right? I don't have to worry about provisioning the workloads and provisioning the machines, the software payments and all that. The software takes care of it, and we have users in demand, right? So a lot of this, like, so I mean, Akash, it's a marketplace where you go sell your compute if you have underutilized supply, right? It's just like Airbnb, right? So compute comes from everywhere. It's mostly like big data centers that are corporate owned. Large clusters. Either they people purchase a lot of these units because there's an opportunity, and uh, and now you gotta find customers to use it.
Mm. Given it's a marketplace that you guys have created with all these different providers of H100 chips and power, basically processing power, like what other elements would you say lead to some like players like Akash Network being able to provide these services at a fraction of a cost of AWS? Like why? What makes the price difference? What drives that?
So, because most compute on Akash is underutilized compute, not cloud compute. So cloud companies have to sell compute at a margin. Companies on Akash are selling compute because they can't sell compute, or they don't have. They're not cloud companies. They're not set up to be a cloud company. They're selling compute because they don't have the use for them right now, and they want like short-term rentals. You know, same mechanics, same economics as Airbnb versus Hilton, right? Hilton, they have to make money. They have to sell you that at margin. Whereas Airbnb, they have a house, they have a room. They're not using the room, but they use the rest of the house. So they'll take whatever they could get, right? So that's the mechanism, the economics of Akash. So not everything is cheap. It's like some are super cheap, like CPU, but GPUs are not that cheap. They're relatively like maybe compared to like Lambda, maybe they're like 30% cheaper or 40% cheaper. Um, but Lambda is like you don't get supply, and it's very hard to get GPU. So it's all kinds of interesting
Mm. And
economics there. Yeah.
what's been your favorite use case that's come out of Akash Network? People building on
Ooh,
people
Venice
building.
AI is amazing.
Yeah, I mean AI is an obvious one. There's it's definitely like that's the bottleneck really is processing power.
Yeah, AI. Venice AI is amazing. I use Venice a lot as my personal. Uh, Recently I had a story. I mean, I have a medical diagnosis. I had not to get into what it is, but Venice is this incredible platform that's fully private, that's fully censorship resistant, that is um, amazing to use. Beautiful experience. It's founded by this person called Eric Voorhees, who's a crypto OG, right? Eric is known as it's one of the oldest man in crypto, they call him. But he's incredible. He's very valued. Eric um, started this company that doesn't really gives you privacy guarantees. I know for sure because I use Akash, so they have these privacy guarantees. I know for sure that they don't read your texts because they use Akash, right? Um, I'm so confident using the product because I know I have the guarantees. So recently I had a medical diagnosis. I was diagnosed. I mean, I had a medical report and had a lot of questions that I couldn't ask the doctor in the hospital because in hospital you're like under drugged out or whatnot. Came home, I couldn't sleep, and I uploaded my diagnosis to Venice, and it gave me such incredible clarity because diagnosis they write whatever. I could ask all these questions and it would answer with high accuracy and take those questions. And again, I wrote a nice email to my doctor next day, and my doctor said exactly what the AI said. So I was able to sleep better that night because of AI, right? So, I mean, when I see products built on Akash and me as a user making a difference in my life, that's a big deal for me. I use Venice a lot. I mean, the reason I use Venice and not ChatGPT is because I know for sure something as private as my medical report, I know for sure that's not going to be abused. But ChatGPT abuses. I mean, ChatGPT people, in fact, the employees themselves, they say they read your text. There's no privacy in ChatGPT, right? Censorship. Who knows what your data can be used against you. I want privacy in my for my data. So yeah, so privacy optimized, censorship resistant chat service is amazing. Um, we saw Noose Research. Noose is a incredible AI company using Akash. They announced yesterday they figured out how to do distributed training, and that is a such an important puzzle for AI. And they've done the research on Akash. Prime Intellect, same. It's funny because Prime Intellect is another company that also is working on distributed training. They implemented Open Dialog Co. Again, all the research was done on Akash. So we have incredible research now being done on Akash, right? That's pushing the boundaries of AI. I think that's very exciting for me. Um, then NVIDIA offering. I mean, NVIDIA is obviously using Akash for lower cost cloud, but there was another really cool story. There's another the first ever LATAM pre-trained model, Spanish pre-trained model was done on Akash. Right. So we have a lot of these like very cool like stories that are coming out. I see this every day. But yeah, Venice I think is my most exciting.
I haven't heard, so I'd love to check them out. That sounds like amazing use case. Yeah. Greg, we're getting to the last bit of the podcast. I'm gonna have to wrap up soon. It's been such a pleasure having you on, but I want to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. One being, what does the future hold for Akash? Like, what's the one thing that's really exciting you about the next stage of growth?
So the big shift for Akash is transition from a single
Yeah, that's cool.
service
That's cool. You can
network
carry on.
to
I
a
just made a note of it.
multi-service network. And then we'll have a framework for building the services, right? So, and in the traditional fashion of having a marketplace component, these services are not managed by Akash people, but people that write the service themselves. Like, what if you have, news research, which is obviously the company, but they also do, they offer the Hermes model, the Hermes 3, right, which is a very popular model. What if news themselves offer hosting for you as a service, and part of the royalty is going back to news, right? Or hosting fees going to news. What if the creators of Postgres themselves offering Postgres as a service to you with royalties going back to them? What if Redis, for example? What if the creator of the Redis or companies associated with offering the services for you because they're the best people to offer the services, right? So Akasha transitions from this like simple cloud to this like network of networks, which I think is very, very powerful. And I think that's how we get to mass adoption. And that's how we solve the parity problem. Because right now, a big challenge, another challenge we didn't talk about is Akash doesn't have all the services Amazon has, right? Akash just has compute. Amazon has 500 different services.
Hmm.
But how do we get to those 500 different services without building all of it? Is through this mode of building networks, right? And that's where crypto is incredible. Incentives are amazing. So I think us going towards that future is very exciting for me.
That's a great answer. And lastly, Greg, before we wrap up, what is your favorite use case of DePIN outside of what you guys are immediately doing?
I mean, you know, I think I love just the whole stack, right? So I think I love what Helium is doing with mobile. I was blown away. I love what just the general storage networks are doing. I mean, Filecoin has 2% of global storage, which is amazing, right? Jackal is another protocol that's happening in crypto. I mean, so the taking a little deviation from your virtual networks, going into actual physical networks, be it energy, uh, I saw like some uh, another protocol like a fund I think it's called Daylight. They're creating an energy marketplace, which is awesome. Yeah. So there are a lot of really cool use cases that are just diverging. All these traditional systems that were very hard to disrupt are getting disrupted, which I think is, yeah, which I think is amazing, right? And we're seeing for the first time, and this is only happening in crypto, and I think that is going to put us in a center stage when it comes to the mainstream audience than DeFi.
I completely agree with you. And yeah, decentralized energy is one that's not, it's sort of scratching the surface right now. But yeah, it's, multi-trillion dollar industry. So yeah, I'm really excited for that one for sure. Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast on We Are Deep In and talking about Akash. So thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, we'll wrap it up there. So thank you so much again. And I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sina.